Hey, happy December 26th to everybody. Hope everybody had a great weekend and a great day yesterday with your families and loved ones. We are past that season now, and Ben, we have now entered a new season, and that is playoff season for college football and for Alabama football. I'm Matt Scalisi. I'm joined here by Ben Flanagan, and this is the first of what will be a daily show for you guys throughout the playoffs, as long as Alabama remains alive in the playoff hunt. We're calling it Playoff Central, and this is a show that we will keep you up to date on everything going on with Alabama during the playoffs. And this show is brought to you by our good friends over at Medical Properties Trust. I'm Matt Scalisi. I'm going to be your host for all or most of these anyway, and I'm joined today by Ben Flanagan, who is my co-host on Bammers, a show that we do weekly throughout the season and off season. And Ben also hosts a podcast of the same name. So Ben, this was a month where I think Alabama fans maybe had a little bit of time to gather some perspective about how they ended up in this position, right? I mean, we were all sitting here maybe a month and a half ago thinking wasn't looking so great for this team. Maybe this team had kind of a low ceiling, but here we are now. We've spent all of December watching Alabama rack up awards and get ready for another run at a potential national title.
Yeah, Matt, football's the real reason for the season, right? Thankfully, we got all the formalities out of the way. I think people were probably spending part of their church services gathering perspective on
You
football.
joke, but I'm sure it was on some people's minds yesterday.
No, I fully agree. I'm being dead serious right now. I mean, now we can actually focus on, again, the real reason here. Alabama's got an important game coming up, and look, it's tough, and it's just kind of funny and a shame that Alabama fans and we who have covered it for so many years have to look back on all the experience and what it's like this time of year, waiting for that big game instead of playing one of these early bowl games. And it's just always interesting. It's never really the same. Cincinnati brings a lot of challenges. A lot of external factors bring a lot of unexpected challenges for Alabama, where I think, and we'll get into a little later, but it seems like Alabama's biggest opponent this year is going to be COVID, right? Just in terms of staying healthy, now that the College Football Playoff has announced these rule changes, and if your team is sick, then you could forfeit the game. If everybody's sick, there will be no national champion. Like, it's all wild and weird, Matt. This is uncharted territory. Like, even last year, this isn't something that people really talked about or thought about. So it's unique circumstances, to say the least. They're making sports history with those rules, Matt. Aren't we all glad that we're there to see it?
When those updates to the playoff COVID policy came out, I think it was last week, it was shocking to a lot of people. It was really frustrating. I know people are thinking about it and worrying about it a lot. Brett here in the comments is asking for updates on it. We'll get into that right now. I think it's important to let everybody know, first off, that, we heard from Nick Saban today. As soon as they got off the plane in Dallas, it was one of the first questions he was asked: what's the team's situation with COVID right now? We know already, for those, but maybe some of you don't, who have not been keeping up with some of these headlines, but 2 coaches on the Alabama coaching staff currently have tested positive for COVID, and they are having to essentially prepare remotely with the team, is what Saban said today. And those 2 coaches are Doug Marrone, the offensive line coach, and Bill O'Brien, the offensive coordinator. So as Saban pointed out, he went through this with the Iron Bowl last year. He was not present for that game, wasn't around for most of the week, and actually sort of zoomed into meetings with the rest of the coaching staff, with the players he was preparing. In this particular case, kind of an interesting note from Saban that an old and recognizable name to a lot of Alabama fans has actually stepped in to help while these 2 coaches are out. Joe Pendry, who was Nick Saban's first offensive line coach at Alabama, and really was a very trusted member of that staff, reportedly had a big input on what the offense looked like in those early years under Saban. He has temporarily stepped in to coach the offensive line. while Doug Marrone is gone and while Bill O'Brien is remotely game planning as well. Saban did say that both of those coaches will be out of COVID protocol by the time of the game, by the way. So they will be in Dallas. They will be present for the game by the time it happens. Outside of that, the good news is no players are in COVID protocol right now, according to Saban. They don't have any positive tests among the players thus far. Some of them are traveling separately from the rest of the team. They went home to see their families, and they'll catch up with the rest of the team today. We will certainly let you guys know on this daily show that we do every day if that changes, if there is any news of players coming out. But Ben, honestly, compared to what we are seeing around the rest of college football right now, Alabama looks to have been extremely fortunate with this so far, knock on wood.
The stakes couldn't be higher at this point. I mean, we already knew that they were high, them being in a college football playoff semifinal game. I mean, Cincinnati's not going to be an easy opponent, and nobody really knows what to expect because I'm guessing a lot of Alabama fans haven't paid close attention to Cincinnati's season. So hard to write them off, even though Alabama's a big favorite. But the stakes got even higher with these COVID issues that all of sports seem to be having. Really, all of America seems to be having right now, and Alabama could be impacted by it. They already have been, just in terms of the coaches who have gotten sick, thankfully with mild symptoms and hopefully back for the game. So it's really tricky, Matt. Like, I think that at this point, Alabama fans and others are probably just nervous that the game won't happen, right? Like if players get sick, and we've seen it in the NFL and the NBA and obviously in college with bowl games getting suspended and canceled altogether in some cases, it could happen to this game, but we certainly hope it doesn't. It sounds like Alabama has it figured out in terms of following familiar protocols that keep the team safe, that keep them from getting sick. Hopefully they don't get sick regardless of what the protocols are. But Alabama runs a very tight ship. That's how they were able to be so successful in 2020. And so if they apply those same rules for this team and this season, then maybe they'll have similar success. But just very tricky, unpredictable stuff. And it would just be a shame. And, just going back to those rules, Matt, where the college football playoff said if a team gets sick, then they forfeit. If two teams are sick, they both forfeit, and the other team is the national champion by default. That's just one of the most ridiculous things that I can remember in recent memory in sports, that you would be willing to cancel the game, not even have a college football national championship game just because the teams happen to get sick, wouldn't postpone them. I can't really understand the logic outside of the obvious circumstances involving TV deals and all the money that's at stake with these games. And it's understandable to a degree, but man, it would just be a shame if we just didn't get to see this season finish in the right way.
No, nobody wants to see that. And I agree. I mean, I think the lack of flexibility is really frustrating to see. And it's something that college football has, unfortunately, this has kind of always been an issue for this sport. They're not very nimble. They're not good at changing things on the fly. So it can create a problem. The good news is so far, Alabama seems to be in good shape. We haven't heard any negative news out of Cincinnati so far. And, we're essentially, roughly a week away from this game happening. We're in a good spot right now. Alabama, I would argue, has maybe done as good a job as anybody in college football at not letting COVID become an issue for their team or a factor. And I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. And look, there is the outside chance, there's the rare possibility that a disaster could happen here. Hopefully, everything stays on the track that it's on right now, and that does not become a factor in this game.
It's tough, Matt, too, because, I mean, as we reported on AL.com earlier today after Saban, his press conference in Dallas, I mean, there are some players and people who are associated with the program who are traveling separately from the team, right? Sure. And so they're having to fly to Dallas and link up with the team based on whatever their travel situation was for the holidays. And so that obviously creates, some potential scenarios that put, the season in jeopardy potentially. But hopefully everybody was safe. Hopefully nobody was sick, and they get together and they're all happy and safe and following the protocols that everybody's asked them to. They were able to do it last year successfully, and Alabama was able to play the games, no problems, no questions asked. And you just hope that's the situation because, I mean, it's been a long season and people want to see these games and they want to see a college football national championship game. I mean, I just can't fathom the fact that, or the idea that they would be willing to cancel that and not willing to push it back. And like you said, not have the flexibility that fans would want and expect in this sport that they love so much.
Absolutely. I think above everything else, we all would just like to see these games played out on paper. Though, and look, we somehow were able to do it a year ago. Hopefully that continues to be the case. Just for everybody still joining us, great crowd today in the comments. Lots of Roll Tides from different parts of the country. We've got one from Missouri here. I've seen a couple from as far away as New York and the West Coast. We got Pat Roberts from southeastern Alabama.
Matt, did you hear? Everybody, did you listen to Nick Saban? Nick Saban's last question at his press conference today was from someone in Mexico.
That's right.
He wished Saban Merry Christmas, and then basically asked Saban, "Do you have anything to tell your fans in Mexico?" And Saban kind of spoke to just sort of the global reach that Alabama football has, and it really is amazing. Alabama football is a global brand. It is not just national. It is across the world. I have talked to people who have been all over the world where they've seen Roll Tide written on tabletops in Italian restaurants in Rome, Italy, or they go to Israel and Jerusalem where there's a Crimson Tide football store in the middle of one of the markets. So it's amazing how far it stretches, and we're seeing it now in our comments from all over the country. But Alabama football, like, if you grew up in Alabama, you just never would dream that people would be saying Roll Tide from all over the world. So it's amazing.
Pretty wild. So yeah, thanks to everybody joining us from wherever you are on our AL.com Playoff Central show. We're going to be doing this every day. We'll try to pick a consistent time frame from you guys, but we're probably going to build it a little bit around whatever's going on at the playoffs every day, so we can bring you guys updates and the latest information on everything you guys need to know. It can be a lot to keep up with, a lot to follow along with. So that's what we're going to try to do on this show every day for you guys. And again, this show is brought to you guys by Medical Properties Trust, who's one of our great sponsors that has been with us all season this year throughout the fall. So Ben, another factor that I would say really isn't looking like it's going to be that much of a factor right now for Alabama, at least not in a bigger way than we have already seen thus far. But Saban was asked about the injury situation. Injuries so far not been an issue for Alabama after the SEC championship game. Now, we know that there were a couple of key injuries in that game that will impact Alabama for the remainder of the playoffs. One of those that really a key member of this team, a guy who made some of the biggest plays of the season for Alabama, being John Mechie, the senior receiver on this team, I think had become at times it almost felt like he was the entire offense for Alabama when a lot of other things weren't working. So a tough loss to have, but Ben, it comes at a time when Alabama's offense appears to be finding a little bit more confidence, appeared to be figuring some things out a little bit. And now they've had basically a full month to solve this problem, to figure out who can step in and try and at least take on some of the load of the work that John Mechie was doing for this offense.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, Alabama luckily has a lot of depth at wide receiver, a lot of talented guys, and we've seen them make plays this season too. Ja'Cory Brooks, obviously, most recently against Auburn. Trayshawn Holden has had some big catches. People are familiar with A.G. Hall in terms of his A-Day performance and have wondered sort of where he's been in terms of being productive or at least even on the field this season. But it sounds like he has opportunities, and Bryce Young and Nick Saban have been very confident about their abilities and what they'll be able to contribute. Obviously, Slade Bolden will probably see a lot of snaps as we're accustomed to seeing. But, no matter how talented you are, experience goes a long way. And John Mechie was just a guy who was so experienced, so much institutional knowledge in terms of the playbook, and just very productive, had 1,000-yard plus season, came up huge in the Auburn game, huge in the SEC championship, just a guy who's tough to replace. But, thankfully Alabama has a lot of guys who are probably willing to step up in terms of that next man up mentality. So we'll see. But losing John Mechie is big, Matt. But, this is their opportunity now, and you just have to hope. And JoJo Earl, too, if he's healthy enough to get back on the field. So Alabama has options, but Mechie, that was a tough one. That was a really tough one, I think, for a lot of Alabama fans like James Ratcliffe there when Mechie went down in the first half against Auburn. Or I'm
For
sorry,
sure.
against
Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick note. There's another injury I want to talk about really quickly, but a quick note here just to answer this question because it was on our previous topic that we're probably not going to go back to. Sam Robinson wanted to know when will they test all the players, and I'm assuming he means for COVID. The good news about that, Sam, is they actually do not test players who are non-symptomatic. So unless they feel sick or are showing symptoms, if they are vaccinated, they do not get tested. So they're in a pretty good spot because, as Nick Saban told us today, 92% of the team is not only fully vaccinated but has had their boosters as well. So the team is really very unlikely to have many players on the team tested unless any of them are showing symptoms. So that's good news for this team too. So yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way real quick. But Ben, another name that Alabama lost right at the end of the season that they're going to have to account for is Josh Jobe, who has been a starting defensive back for this secondary for the entire season. A guy that really they've had on the field in almost every personnel package for most of the year. And I think it's tough to replace that type of experience. It's tough to replace a guy that really has been on the field for Alabama since he first arrived on campus. He is very well versed in what Nick Saban likes to do. I think, again, the gap of time between the SEC championship game and now has created some opportunities for other guys to step up, and they're going to need some young defensive backs who really have not played a lot to suddenly play a much bigger role.
Yeah, it feels kind of like Alabama's snake bit, just in terms of like how many players they've lost and at what positions they've lost them and who the players are. But Alabama is just obviously known for how well they recruit and what kind of depth that they're able to build. And, once again, like at running back and wide receiver, there's depth at the position. And Josh Jobe, that was a key loss, and nobody expected that. And so when they announced that he would be out for the season, man, that was a tough pill to swallow. But thankfully, with Jalen Armour-Davis's absence late in the season, Kool-Aid McKinstry has been able to step in and has gained some really important reps against Auburn in particular when he made big plays down the stretch against them. But him being on the field the last couple of games at this point in the season has been crucial. But it sounds like Jalen Armour-Davis presumably will return for this game. There are some other guys back there like Kyrie Jackson, Jaquez Robinson, Terrion Arnold, who are capable and I'm sure getting a lot of practice reps in case they have to come into the game. But expect to see a lot of Kool-Aid and Jalen Armour-Davis. That is, if Jalen Armour-Davis is even feeling well enough to play the entire game. So really tough to lose Josh Jobe. He's a good player and was very important in terms of the secondary success this year. Malachi Moore will probably step up a little more, see a little bit more of him and Brian Branch on the field at the same time. Those guys are playmakers and, again, fully capable of doing their job. But, you just have to rely on the depth at this point. But Cincinnati is going to challenge that secondary now, especially with guys with such limited experience coming onto the field.
Nothing new on Chris Allen, by the way, since Michael Vaughn asked about that. There were some rumors going around on social media that he was going to be ready for the playoffs, and those turned out to have come from a source that was not reputable. His dad actually came out and said, "Don't listen to that. It's not necessarily the case." So, we'll see. We'll see if that is if there is any good news on any currently injured players or guys who've been missing time this season. Saban didn't have anything to say about it today. Said there weren't any updates, and basically everything that there was to say about injuries has already been said. There was nothing new for him to say. So
good. That's good news.
Overall, yes.
Yeah. If they haven't had any sort of like injury at practice that's going to knock somebody else out, that's the news I think Saban would probably share, if anything. I don't know if Chris Allen's going to come back. Who knows? It would be great if he did. Who knows what his level of health would be if he came back. But thankfully, again, you get back into the depth conversation in terms of outside linebackers and edge rushers. Guys like Dallas Turner and Drew Sanders have had excellent seasons so young in their careers. The fact that he went down as early as he did, sadly, it gave them an opportunity, and they have taken full advantage. So it's good to see those guys stepping up. But, man, it would be great to see Chris Allen play again this season.
A really interesting kind of path for this team, or a trajectory, Ben, because as you mentioned, this team really felt like it had really bad injury luck at times this season. And almost a side effect of that in some ways has been that this team has ended up maturing very late in the season and almost seems to be peaking at just the right time. That remains to be seen if that continues into the playoffs, but that seems to be what it's looking like. Saban spoke to that a little bit today too, when he was asked about the loss to Texas A&M and how it sort of changed his team's mindset. He said he really thought that they started maturing after that point, that they weren't really taking things as seriously as they needed to until that happened. And I think he sees that maturity starting to happen and really, kind of hitting a new level late in the Auburn game and then into the SEC championship game. This is the exact time of year where you want it to all start clicking. So we'll see. Ben, finally, just to wrap up today, we haven't really, talked about Cincinnati at all as a fan base, as you mentioned earlier this season. Alabama fans don't have a lot of cause to watch teams like Cincinnati. They're usually paying attention to the other teams that are kind of the traditional blue bloods in the race for the playoffs. They certainly were paying attention to, what was going on with Ohio State and Michigan and Oregon and teams like that. Didn't really pay so much attention to Cincinnati. And, I think Nick Saban brought up a couple of names on the offensive side for them today that he thinks they're going to really have to work hard to be able to counter. Jerome Ford, who is a former Alabama player, who's now the starting running back at Cincinnati, has been a huge part of their offense. The other guy that Saban mentioned today, Desmond Ridder, who's the starting quarterback for Cincinnati, Saban had a lot of good things to say about him, about the way that he sort of directs that offense and puts his team in a good position to succeed. So, they've got some film to watch in terms of them playing against elite competition. They played Notre Dame this year. They played Georgia in the bowl game last year, which Saban brought up as a really good thing for his team to watch and take away things from. But other than that, it's kind of a difficult preparation challenge to get ready for a team like Cincinnati, because we don't really know what they're going to do when they have to line up against a team that they're not equally matched against in terms of basic sort of physicality, raw talent level. And this is not to disrespect Cincinnati at all. They're obviously a very successful team, is very good at what they do, but they're not going to be able to sort of play the same style of football against Alabama. And in some ways, that can be a difficult preparation job if you are the Alabama in this situation, because they're probably not going to have the same game plan against you that they had against Tulsa and Houston.
You mean those teams that they kind of struggled against? I mean, like,
they did, yeah.
I mean, look, but this is a different game. They made it to where they made it, and it all comes down to how they perform against Alabama. And we know that teams that aren't supposed to do well against Alabama can have the game of their lives against them. I mean, go back to Texas A&M when Alabama walked in as like a near 20-point favorite to win that game. Didn't matter. Texas A&M beat them in convincing fashion, even when they jumped out on such an early lead. So Cincinnati could be just as capable. Desmond Ridder is a very talented player. Jerome Ford, very talented player, as Alabama fans know. Alec Pierce, wide receiver, very talented player. And those defensive backs who are, I think, each projected potentially as being first-round draft picks this year. I mean, Cincinnati has talent, and they've been very productive. So, yes, they struggled against Indiana. Yes, they struggled against Navy and Tulsa and Houston to some extent, Tulane to some extent. But they pulled away. They won all those games. They're undefeated, so they know how to win. They know how to compete. Alabama's a different beast, but it may not matter if they play the game of their lives. So hopefully Alabama knows that. Hopefully that's the mentality going into the season. Alabama, hopefully, I've seen some Twitter chatter when it comes to talking trash against Auburn, talking trash against some players, engaging a little friendly trash talk.
For sure.
I think that would probably qualify as clutter, rat poison, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully the focus is just Cincinnati, because Cincinnati, if they're healthy, they're going to show up and they're going to want to beat Alabama. So we can't presume anything here. So here's just hoping Alabama's ready for it. I think that they probably will be. I think one thing that's interesting, Matt, is that Cincinnati and Alabama have had some mutual opponents in the last couple of years. Last season, Cincinnati fell short against Georgia in the Peach Bowl, which could be a rematch of the Peach Bowl in the national championship if that worked out. Georgia won that game by 3, and then they've obviously played Notre Dame this season. Alabama beat them in the college football semifinal last year. So you have to think that Alabama's definitely keyed in on that film to see how Cincinnati lines up against the teams they've played and to see what kind of success they've had, because they obviously beat a top 10 Notre Dame team at the time. So we all know at this point, 13 games later, that Cincinnati is not bad and that they're going to come to win.
Absolutely. We will have more from Cincinnati throughout the week once we get a chance to talk to them during their media availabilities while they're in Dallas. They also arrived at the Cotton Bowl today. Another thing that I think we'll want to talk about throughout the week is a comment that got brought up here by Travis Williams, and I've seen a few folks see this, that how important Alabama's running game is going to be against Cincinnati, with everything we talked about regarding John Mechie's injury, regarding how talented Cincinnati's defensive backs are. They've got a couple of guys that are projected to go really high in the draft. Alabama's running game could really be a key to their success in this game, and they've now found themselves in a situation where they kind of had to limp through November, Ben, with so many injuries at that position, and Brian Robinson getting banged up in the Iron Bowl. They were really down to kind of dire circumstances late in the season, but now they've had a few weeks for Brian Robinson to get healthy again. Trey Sanders looks like he's becoming a little bit more comfortable out there. They've had a couple of guys that they moved over for depth at that position, who now they've had that many more practices at the position and that much more comfortable with the offense. The running game at a time when Alabama may need to lean on it is looking, it's certainly still battered by injuries, but it is perhaps in the best shape that it's been for a couple of months.
Yeah, I think had Brian Robinson not gotten healthy again, which it seems like he has, then it would be a major cause for concern. But if Brian Robinson's ready to go and we see Trey Sanders right there behind him, somebody who has, again, had incredibly important reps over the past couple of games, I think Alabama's in great shape. I think the offensive line has looked great. The last, we'll say the last game in the fourth quarter of the Auburn game anyway, they've been fantastic. And if they're gelling at the right time, then we could see those guys bulldoze their way and churn out some great yards on the ground. But Matt, I want to ask you a question, and before we go, and at least posit this to some of the fans out there who are listening and watching. You get Christmas cards every year from people that and sometimes people put them up on their wall, on their fridge or whatever. But what about the Auburn fans who send you Christmas cards? And sometimes they'll send them to you. And this year I got a Christmas card where they had Aubie on the Christmas card. Do you put that on the wall? If you're an Alabama fan, do you put a Christmas card that has Aubie on the fridge or the wall? Bama fans, what would you do?
I'm going to suggest that was the point. I'm going to suggest that you got sent an ostentatiously Auburn Christmas card because they're trying to stick it to you and get you to put a picture of Aubie up on your refrigerator, Ben.
Well, I just want to know if anybody in the comments wants to say what would you do with that card? Tell me what you would do with that card if you got it in the mail. Would it go on the wall or would it go somewhere else? I have to think it would go somewhere else.
Here's an answer from Gary Farmer. He says, get new friends. That's his solution to the problem. So Chris Camp says, put it on my dartboard. So they're ready. They're ready here. They
that's
know
that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, there are Auburn fans that are going to do what they can to try and get one in at you. I've actually seen a lot of conversation on Twitter the last few days from Auburn fans talking about, hey, we sacked Bryce Young 7 times. We held him to the lowest output of his entire season. You mentioned kind of the jabs from Alabama players at Auburn the last few days and how that might be concerning, but I think you can understand why there's still a little bit of tension left over. An Iron Bowl like that, as satisfying as it was for Alabama and as fun as it was to win that game, I think there's some leftover tension from it. I think that one really might resonate for the rest of the offseason a little bit.
Yeah, Matt, I think I'm going to send them a frame with 8 photos on it. Seven photos of every sack from the game, and then the 8th is for the scoreboard from at the end of the game, just to see, how, or one that says War Eagle anyway. Maybe I'll do something that says War Eagle anyway that they can put up on their house, because I know that that's a popular rallying cry when things like that happen. What happened a few weeks ago? So, hey, man.
Lots of good suggestions here from including multiple people saying burn it. One said burn it on the show. So we're definitely, look, you guys have no love lost for Auburn after that game. We know that a win in the Iron Bowl does not diminish the passion of that rivalry at all. Has not changed anything. So Ben, we will hopefully hear from you later this week again. We'll rotate some folks in. We'll let you guys talk to the beat writers at some point. We'll have our friend John Talty, who's a columnist for us, on here as well this week. And eventually, if everything goes like it's supposed to go, we will have a couple of these shows from Dallas for you guys as we get closer to the game and put you guys there on the ground with the team. So, thanks first of all to everybody for joining us today and participating. Huge crowd in the comments. Love to see all of you guys participating and asking questions during the show. Looking forward to the next week as we get you guys ready for the playoffs here on AL.com's Playoff Central, presented by Medical Properties Trust. Ben, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you again later in the week as after we kind of get a few days under our belt getting ready for this game.
Thank you, Matt. Happy holidays to everybody. Stay safe out there.
Absolutely. And guys, we will have tons more coverage of Alabama's run towards the Cotton Bowl for you guys right here, wherever you're watching this, whether it's YouTube or Facebook. And of course, all of our great coverage from our writers over at AL.com. Thanks again for joining us for AL.com's Playoff Central, presented by Medical Properties Trust. And we will see you guys tomorrow.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.